What would you do if the walls you built to hide from the world suddenly became your only defense against a deadly force of nature? Clara thought her secret underground bedroom was just a clever way to escape her financial ruin. She never expected it to become her tomb or her salvation. Clara Bennett did not build the room out of paranoia. She built it out of pure, desperate necessity. 3 years ago, Clara had inherited a sprawling, custom-built log cabin in the remote, heavily forested foothills of the Wyoming Wind River Range. It was a beautiful piece of architecture left to her by her late grandfather, Arthur Higgins. But beauty doesn't pay property taxes. Buried under a mountain of medical debt from her mother's final illness and facing the brutal reality of a failing freelance career in Chicago, Clara realized she was on the verge of losing the only piece of family legacy she had left. The cabin was her sanctuary, but it was also an untapped gold mine. Appraisers told her she could charge a premium for short-term vacation rentals, especially during the winter ski season. There was just one glaring problem. If she rented out the cabin, she would have nowhere to live. The nearest affordable town was a 2-hour drive away, and she couldn't afford a second mortgage. So Clara made a radical, highly unorthodox decision. She would rent out the cabin, and she would simply never leave. Over the course of a grueling summer, Clara excavated the deep crawl space beneath the cabin's massive oak floorboards. Using her grandfather's old mining tools and reinforced timber, she dug out a space 10 feet wide and 12 feet long. She poured a rudimentary concrete slab, lined the dirt walls with heavy-duty vapor barriers and rigid foam insulation, and framed it out. She rerouted a branch of the cabin's plumbing to a small utility sink and a chemical toilet, and expertly tapped into the main electrical panel to power a few lights, a mini fridge, and a small space heater. The genius of her design was the entrance. Underneath a heavy, hand-woven Navajo rug in the master bedroom closet, she installed a reinforced steel trapdoor on hydraulic hinges. From the top it looked and felt exactly like the rest of the hardwood floor. By November, Clara's secret subterranean bedroom was complete. It was cramped, windowless, and smelled faintly of earth and pine sap, but it was cozy. More importantly, it allowed her to list the Higgins Retreat online for $600 a night. Her life became an exercise in silent, invisible coexistence. When guests arrived, Clara retreated beneath the earth. She lived on a schedule dictated by the footsteps above her. She read by the light of a small desk lamp, listened to audiobooks with noise-canceling headphones, and cooked simple meals on a single-burner induction stove only when the guests were out hiking or skiing. In late January, a wealthy couple from Seattle arrived for a 2-week stay. Harrison and Rachel Cole were the quintessential premium guests, demanding, loud, and entirely oblivious to the world outside their immediate comfort zone. Clara watched them pull up the long, winding driveway in a pristine black Range Rover, through a hidden pinhole camera she had wired near the front porch. Once they were settled inside, Clara slipped down into her bunker, pulling the heavy trapdoor shut and locking the deadbolt on the underside. She listened to the muffled thud of their designer boots walking directly over her head. She heard the clinking of wine glasses, the heavy bass of the cabin's sound system playing jazz, and the low murmur of their conversation. For the first few days, the arrangement worked flawlessly. Clara collected her rental income digitally, and the Coles enjoyed their luxurious, secluded getaway. But Clara had been so preoccupied with staying hidden that she hadn't paid enough attention to the shortwave radio sitting on her desk. If she had, she would have known that the National Weather Service had just issued an emergency broadcast. A massive, unprecedented low-pressure system was stalling over the Rockies. Meteorologists were calling it a bomb cyclone. The locals, like Sheriff Miller in the valley below, were already calling it the storm of the decade. Down in her bunker, Cora was insulated from the early signs. She couldn't see the sky turning a bruised, terrifying shade of purple. She couldn't feel the sudden, unnatural drop in barometric pressure that made the wildlife flee deep into the woods. The only warning Cora got was the sudden, frantic change in the footsteps above. Harrison Cole was pacing heavily across the living room floor. Through the ventilation shaft, a cleverly disguised pipe that ran up through the cabin's main stone chimney, Cora could hear his voice, pitched high with irritation. "Rachel, the signal is completely dead. The Wi-Fi is out and the landline is just static. Look outside. It's like a white wall out there." Cora frowned, setting down her book. She reached over and flipped on her local weather radio. The automated emergency voice sliced through the silence of her underground room. Historic blizzard conditions, zero visibility, wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour, temperatures plummeting to 40 below zero. Do not attempt to travel. Stay indoors. This is a life-threatening situation. Cora's stomach plummeted. This wasn't just a snowstorm. This was a whiteout. By nightfall, the full fury of the bomb cyclone slammed into the Wyoming wilderness. Even buried under several feet of earth and heavy timber, Cora could hear the wind. It didn't howl. It screamed. It sounded like a freight train was perpetually derailing directly over the cabin. The heavy wooden floorboards above her creaked and groaned under the immense atmospheric pressure and the rapidly accumulating weight of the snow. Cora sat wrapped in the thick wool blanket, staring at the ceiling. The temperature in her bunker was holding steady at a comfortable 60 degrees, thanks to the deep earth insulation and her small heater. But she knew the situation above ground was deteriorating rapidly. Around 9 p.m., the inevitable happened. The main power grid for the county, a fragile line stringing through miles of dense forest, failed. Cora's bunker was plunged into pitch blackness for a terrifying 3 seconds before her heavy-duty battery bank automatically kicked in, bathing her small room in a soft, dim LED glow. Above her, she heard a sharp shriek from Rachel, followed by the dull thud of someone bumping into furniture. "Harrison, what happened?" Rachel's voice filtered down through the chimney vent, tight with panic. "The power's out. Just stay put. Let me find my phone." Harrison replied, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the cabin. Cora knew the cabin had a backup propane generator outside, designed to automatically kick on within 30 seconds of a power failure. She held her breath, counting the seconds. 10, 20, 30, 60, nothing. The wind was too fierce. It had either frozen the generator's intake valves shut or ripped the heavy metal casing right off its concrete pad. Without the generator, the cabin's central heating system was dead. Over the next 4 hours, Cora listened to the terrifying reality of survival playing out just 10 feet above her head. The luxury cabin, with its massive floor-to-ceiling windows, was bleeding heat, with outside temperatures dropping to 35 degrees below zero and wind chills pushing -60. The interior of the cabin would soon become a freezer. She heard Harrison struggling to light a fire in the massive stone hearth. He was a city man, clumsy with the damp firewood they had brought in from the porch earlier. After an hour of cursing and snapping kindling, he managed to get a meager blaze going. But a single fireplace was grossly inadequate to heat a 3,000-square-foot log home in an apocalyptic blizzard. "Harrison, I'm freezing." Rachel's voice drifted down, trembling violently. "My toes. I can't feel my toes." "Wrap up in the down comforters from the bed," Harrison snapped, though his own teeth were chattering loud enough for Cora to hear. "We just have to wait it out until morning. They'll send plows." Cora closed her eyes. They won't send plows, she thought grimly. Not for days. The roads will be buried under 10 feet of drift. A heavy knot of moral panic began to tighten in Cora's chest. She was perfectly safe. She had a month's worth of canned food, a battery bank that could power her small heater and lights for 2 weeks, and an emergency thermal sleeping bag. She could easily survive the storm hidden in her subterranean bedroom. But the Coles would not. If they stayed in that rapidly freezing cabin without proper extreme weather gear or survival knowledge, hypothermia would take them before the sun rose. Clara stared at the ceiling. If she unlatched the trap door and revealed herself, she could bring them down here. The space was tight, but 3 bodies would generate even more heat. She could save their lives, but doing so meant exposing her secret. It meant admitting she had been living underneath them, listening to them. The legal repercussions, the sheer violation of privacy Harrison Cole, seemed exactly like the kind of man who would sue her into oblivion, taking the cabin and ruining her life the moment they got back to civilization. Is my financial ruin worth their lives? Clara asked herself, her hands shaking as she touched the cold steel bolt of the trapdoor. She paced the length of her tiny room. The temperature above must have been dropping into the single digits. She heard a heavy metallic crash from the cabin Harrison had likely knocked over the decorative iron fire tools in the dark. "The fire is dying," Rachel sobbed. "The wood is wet, Harrison. It's just smoking." That was it. Clara couldn't let them die. She was a desperate woman, but she wasn't a murderer. She grabbed her heavy winter coat, slipped on her boots, and reached up to grab the handle of the deadbolt. She prepared to push the trapdoor up, prepared to face the shock, the anger, and the immediate end of her sanctuary. Before her fingers could even grasp the metal bolt, a sound like a bomb detonating shattered the air. It was a deafening, catastrophic crack of splitting timber, so loud it vibrated in Clara's teeth. The ground violently shook, knocking Clara off a stepping stool and throwing her hard against the concrete wall of her bunker. Dust and loose dirt rained down from the ceiling joists, coating her in a layer of grime. Above her, the agonizing screech of tearing metal and splintering logs drowned out the howling wind. Clara scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was that? She whispered into the dark. She didn't need to guess for long. A massive 200-year-old ponderosa pine, its shallow roots weakened by the summer drought, and finally pushed beyond its breaking point by the 80-mile-per-hour winds, had snapped. It hadn't just grazed the property. It had come down directly on the master bedroom of the cabin. Through the ventilation shaft, Clara could hear nothing but the raging wind. The roof above the bedroom had been utterly crushed, exposing the interior of the cabin to the lethal elements. "Harrison! Rachel!" Clara screamed, no longer caring about secrecy. There was no answer, only the roar of the blizzard. Clara leaped up onto her stool and shoved her palms against the steel trapdoor, pushing upward with all her might. It didn't budge. Panic surged through her veins. She braced her shoulders against the cold steel, bending her knees and using the immense strength of her legs to heave upward. The door gave a fraction of an inch, just enough to let a blast of sub-zero air slice down into the bunker, and then it hit something immovable. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The massive trunk of the pine tree, weighing several tons, had crashed directly over the master bedroom closet. The heavy rug, the floorboards, and the trapdoor were pinned underneath a solid wall of crushed timber and freezing snow. Clara Bennett wasn't just hiding anymore, she was buried alive. Clara fell backward off the stepping stool, her hands scraped and bleeding from her frantic, futile attempts to dislodge the steel trapdoor. The air in her subterranean room was suddenly thick with the suffocating dust of pulverized drywall and ancient earth. She lay on the cold concrete slab for a long time, listening to the apocalyptic roar of the blizzard above. She was entombed. The realization washed over her, not in a wave of sudden panic, but in a creeping, icy dread that paralyzed her limbs. The massive ponderosa pine had not just fallen, it had effectively sealed the only exit from her makeshift bunker with thousands of pounds of crushing force. For 10 minutes, Clara did nothing but breathe in the dark, watching the dim glow of her emergency LED lights flicker as the battery bank struggled to regulate the power draw. Then, the adrenaline finally kicked in. She scrambled to her feet and grabbed her flashlight, sweeping the beam across the ceiling. The heavy timber joists she had installed during her excavation were groaning, bowing slightly under the immense, unnatural weight of the fallen tree. But they were holding. Her grandfather's mining timber had saved her from being instantly crushed. Harrison, Rachel. Clara screamed again, aiming her voice toward the air intake pipe that routed up through the central stone chimney. Nothing. The wind outside sounded like a jet engine, drowning out any hope of a human response. Clara climbed back onto her stool, pressing her ear against the cold metal of the vent. "Please, someone be alive," she prayed. After agonizing minutes of silence, she heard it. A high, reedy sound cutting through the low bass of the howling wind. It was a woman crying, "Rachel!" Clara yelled into the pipe, her throat tearing with the effort. "Rachel, can you hear me?" The crying stopped abruptly. A few seconds later, a trembling, terrified voice echoed faintly down the metal shaft. Who is that? Is someone there? Help us." "Rachel, my name is Clara. I'm the owner of the cabin. I'm trapped under the floorboards in the master bedroom. Are you hurt? Where is Harrison?" A hysterical bark of disbelief echoed down the pipe. "Under the what? How are you under the floor? The bedroom is gone. The tree destroyed the whole wing of the house." "I know," Clara shouted back, keeping her voice as steady as possible. "I have a storm shelter down here. Is Harrison okay?" "No." Rachel's voice cracked into a sob. "When the tree hit, it shattered the big windows in the living room. The wind threw him against the stone hearth. His leg is broken, Clara. It's really bad. The bone is pushing against his jeans. I dragged him into the hallway bathroom. It's the only room left with a ceiling, but we are freezing to death. It's so cold." Clara's heart sank. A compound fracture in a sub-zero blizzard with no heat and no medical supplies was a death sentence. Shock and hypothermia would kill Harrison within hours. "Rachel, listen to me," Clara instructed, her survival instincts overriding her panic. "You have to stop the bleeding and insulate him. Take down the shower curtain and wrap it around him to block the wind. Then put every towel you can find on top of him. Do you have a lighter?" Yes. Harrison had a Zippo for his cigars." "Good. The bathroom exhaust fan is broken, but you can carefully burn toilet paper in the ceramic sink to generate a tiny bit of heat. Don't let it get out of control. Just keep your hands warm." "What about you?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Can you get out? Can you help us?" Clara looked up at the unyielding steel trapdoor. "I can't. The tree is sitting right on top of my exit. But I have a battery and a small heater. I'll stay on the vent and talk you through the night. We just have to make it to sunrise." For the next 6 hours, Clara played the role of a lifeline. She talked to Rachel through the narrow pipe, keeping the terrified woman awake, guiding her through basic first aid, and forcing her to check Harrison's pulse. But down in the bunker, a new insidious threat was quietly emerging. When the giant pine crushed the bedroom above, its massive root ball had violently disrupted the earth around the cabin's foundation. It had also sheared the main water intake line that ran through the crawlspace. At 3 a.m., Clara felt a cold drop of water hit her forehead. She shined her flashlight at the ceiling. In the corner of the bunker near the utility sink, a steady, freezing stream of water was pushing its way through the rigid foam insulation. The sheared pipe above was bleeding the reserve pressure from the cabin's large water tank directly into the earth, and it was finding the path of least resistance, Clara's bedroom. Panic flared hot in Clara's chest. The temperature in the bunker was already dropping because she had to lower the heater's output to save the failing battery. If she got wet, she would succumb to hypothermia long before she ran out of oxygen. She grabbed her only cooking pot and a plastic storage bin, placing them under the leak. Within 20 minutes, the pot was overflowing. "Rachel," Clara called up the vent, her voice tight. "I have a problem down here." The water line broke. There was a long pause before Rachel replied, her voice incredibly weak and slurred, a terrifying sign of advanced hypothermia. Everything is broken, Clara." Harrison stopped shivering. "I think he's dying." "Rub his arms, Rachel. Keep moving," Clara yelled, frantically dumping her pot of freezing water into her small chemical toilet. For the rest of the night, Clara fought a desperate two-front war. She bailed freezing water, her hands turning blue and numb, while constantly yelling up the vent to keep Rachel tethered to consciousness. The water pooled on the concrete floor, soaking her boots and the edges of her mattress. The humidity in the tiny room spiked, and the icy air bit right through her heavy winter coat. By 7 a.m., the battery bank beeped 3 sharp times and died. The emergency LED lights went out. The small space heater powered down with a final click. Total suffocating darkness consumed the bunker. The only sound was the relentless, mocking drip of the freezing water splashing into the plastic bin. Clara slumped against the damp wall, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her emergency thermal blanket tightly around her shivering frame. She had managed to keep Rachel awake through the worst of the night, but now Clara was fighting for her own life. The temperature in the bunker began to plummet. Daylight brought no immediate relief to the Wind River Range. Though the heavy snow had finally stopped falling, the sky remained a bruised, indifferent gray, and the temperature hovered at a brutal 20 degrees below zero. Beneath the wreckage, Clara was drifting in and out of a dangerous, lethargic sleep. Her core temperature was dangerously low. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, and her fingers were stiff and useless. She hadn't heard a sound from Rachel in over 2 hours. "This is it," Clara thought, her mind moving sluggishly. "This is the tomb I dug for myself." She closed her eyes, ready to let the cold pull her under. Then she felt it, not a sound, but a vibration. A low, rhythmic rumble traveled through the frozen earth and vibrated against the concrete slab of her bunker. Clara forced her heavy eyelids open. She held her breath. Rumble. It was heavy machinery. Snowcats. Up on the surface, Sheriff Miller and a volunteer search and rescue team, accompanied by a snowplow from the County Road Commission, had finally breached the long driveway to the Higgins retreat. What they found made Miller pull off his radio headset in stunned silence. The luxury cabin looked like a child's toy that had been smashed by a hammer. The massive pine tree lay directly across the structure, splitting the roof in two and filling the interior with tons of snow and debris. Spread out, Sheriff Miller barked over the idling engines of the snowcats. "Look for structural voids. Check the basement." Down in the pitch black, Clara heard the faint, muffled shouts. Hope, sharp and agonizing, pierced through her lethargy. She tried to yell, but her throat was completely raw, and her parched lips only produced a dry, useless croak. She needed to make a noise, a loud noise. She forced herself to roll over in the freezing puddle on the floor. Her numb hands fumbled in the dark, searching for her small toolbox. Her fingers brushed against cold, heavy metal. A heavy steel pipe wrench. Clara gripped it with both hands, dragging herself toward the wall, where the cabin's main PVC plumbing pipe ran down into the earth. She raised the heavy wrench and struck the pipe with whatever strength she had left. Can. The sound was shockingly loud in the confined space. Clang. Clang. Sell, Anne. Above ground, Deputy Collins, a young man digging through the snowed-in wreckage of the living room, froze. Beside him, a search dog named Bruno let out a sharp, sudden bark, his ears swiveling toward the floorboards. "Hold up! Quiet!" Collins yelled, raising a hand. The rescue team went dead silent. The wind whistled through the broken timber. Slang. Clang. Clang. The rhythmic, metallic tapping vibrated up through the ruins of the master bedroom. "Over here," Collins shouted, pointing toward the massive trunk of the pine tree. Under the debris, someone's tapping on the pipes. Sheriff Miller waded through the waist-deep snow, shining a heavy flashlight into the crushed timbers of the bedroom. "We need chainsaws, now." "Cut through the trunk. There's a void space underneath." For Cora, the next hour was a terrifying symphony of destruction. The deafening roar of industrial chainsaws directly above her head shook dust and freezing water down on her. The heavy thud of massive logs being thrown aside vibrated in her bones. Finally, she heard the scrape of shovels on hardwood flooring. "I've got a rug here," a muffled voice yelled. "Pull it back." Cora dropped the wrench. She stared up at the ceiling in the dark. A heavy, metallic screech echoed as crowbars bit into the edges of her steel trapdoor. With a groan of protesting hydraulic hinges, the door was violently wrenched open. A blinding shaft of daylight pierced the absolute darkness of the bunker, stabbing Cora's dilated eyes. She raised a shaking, freezing hand to shield her face. A heavily bearded face framed by an orange search and rescue parka leaned over the opening, shining a tactical flashlight down into the hole. Sheriff Miller's jaw dropped in absolute shock. "Mother of God," Miller whispered. "There's a room down here. Get a medic." Now, they pulled Cora out of the freezing, flooded hole with a climbing harness. As she was hauled up into the freezing daylight, she blinked through the snow glare, seeing the utter devastation of her beloved cabin for the first time. The structure was a total loss. "Rachel," Cora croaked out, grabbing Sheriff Miller's thick sleeve as a medic wrapped 3 thermal blankets around her shivering shoulders. The hallway bathroom, Rachel and Harrison. Broken leg. Miller stared at her in shock, then immediately keyed his radio. "Collins, reroute Team 2 to the interior hallway. Breach the bathroom door. We have 2 more survivors." 10 minutes later, Cora sat in a heated cab at the Snowcat, an IV line feeding warm fluids into her arm. She watched as medics carried a violently shivering Rachel out of the wreckage, followed by Harrison, who was strapped to a backboard, his face pale and contorted in pain from his splintered leg. They were alive, barely, but alive. 2 days later, Cora sat in a hospital bed in the Valley Clinic. She had survived with mild frostbite on 3 toes and severe exhaustion, but she was recovering. The door to her room opened and Rachel Cole walked in, leaning heavily on a cane, her face bruised and pale. Cora tensed. This was it. The moment of reckoning. Her secret bunker, her illegal residency, her liability, the wealthy Seattle couple, was going to destroy what little she had left. Rachel walked slowly to the edge of Cora's bed. She looked at Cora, her eyes welling with tears, and did something Cora never expected. Rachel reached out and tightly grasped Cora's hand. "The doctors said Harrison is going to keep his leg," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "They said if you hadn't talked me through wrapping him, and if you hadn't banged on that pipe to lead the dogs straight to that side of the house, we would have died in that bathroom." Cora swallowed hard. "I was living under your feet, Rachel. I was hiding. I lied to you." "You saved us," Rachel said firmly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Harrison and I talked. We know your cabin was destroyed. We have lawyers, Cora, but we also have an insurance fund for the rental. We're not suing you. In fact, Harrison wants to pay to rebuild the cabin." She managed a weak, exhausted smile. though maybe without the secret basement this time. Clara leaned back against the hospital pillows, staring at the stark white ceiling. She had lost her home, her sanctuary, and her secret. But as she felt the warmth returning to her frostbitten toes, she realized she had survived the storm of the decade, and she had found a way to save her grandfather's legacy after all. If you found Clara's harrowing tale of survival beneath the floorboards as gripping as we did, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to spread the ultimate winter survival story. Want more incredible true-to-life dramas and intense survival breakdowns? Subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Stay safe, stay prepared, and we'll see you next time.